All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're talking about the Acolyte, Episode 6, Teach and Corrupt. This is the most convenient and contrived episode of the series yet, and that's saying a lot. Sol sends the vaguest message possible back to the Jedi Order about the massacre that just occurred on the planet below, and at the same time, we have technical difficulties with the communications and the ship out of nowhere for no reason other than to keep the plot moving forward and to maintain an artificial air of mystery. Other than these handful of conveniences, Master Sol solidifies himself as the most unaware Master Jedi in the history of the Order, as he somehow didn't know that May had switched places with Osha last week, even though he had raised Osha since she was a child. May has a spiral tattoo on her forehead, and May is acting completely different. Not to mention that Sol is a Master Jedi who should be able to sense these things and sense differences in other beings. And the saddest part is he only ever finds out not because he figures it out, but because Basil, the giant hamster, figures it out. The heavy-handed writing continues with Master Sol now likely becoming the prime suspect in the murder of all these Jedi because Vernestra and this little Padawan go to the planet. They see a couple lightsaber cuts. And within the same scene, out of nowhere, the Padawan says, "Oh, Master Sol probably did this." And I'm assuming that they're setting this up to be the way that the Sith get away with this, that Master Sol will take the fall for all of this and he'll likely die at the end of the series. But they had to make sure you understood that early because they love to tell the audience exactly what they're thinking and what's going to happen in a supposed mystery show. Also, like, why would Sol call in to the Jedi Order to have them send someone out there if he was the one who did it? Speaking of predictability of a mystery show, I believe in episode 4 I said that Osha and May would flip-flop and Osha would start to fall to the darkness. And lo and behold, this episode we see Qimir seducing her to the dark side, which I actually found somewhat interesting, and that there was some redeeming qualities in this portion of the episode, with Qimir being that silver-tongued Sith or dark side user who would appeal to the weaknesses or the desires of a potential Padawan. But just the fact that they've telegraphed every move that they're making in a mystery show is very underwhelming. And we'll have to see how it plays out, but I think they're walking a very thin line with Chimir's character, and they can't, by the end of this series, justify the dark side of the Force, and that all of these emotions like rage, fear, hatred are usable and should be used. That's not something this show should preach because it goes against the very nature and themes of Star Wars. And I know some people might be like, that's new and interesting, but at the end of the day, it goes against the core tenets of Star Wars. And those are what have made Star Wars so special for the past 45 years since that first movie came out. Now, I know that was a long-winded intro, and I think you all can deduce that I did not like this episode very much, which is pretty much par for the course for the Acolyte at this point. I think I want to deep dive first into Qimir and his characterization in this episode, because within the last 2 episodes, Manny Jacinto has really made this character interesting in a sea of characters that aren't interesting other than Master Sol. I think he fills that very charming silver tongue, dark side user archetype that we see throughout Star Wars, with promises of freedom, and he appeals to her past and how the Jedi might have abandoned her and she didn't leave on her own accord, but she has convinced herself that it was her choice to leave the Jedi. But he implies that maybe there was darkness within her and the Jedi sensed that and they got rid of her before she could become more powerful and maybe a potential threat. That's all fine and within the boundaries of a dark side user who is looking for an apprentice and is doing anything they can to get them under their control. Where I see some issues arising is that Qimir is starting to be shot and being inferred to be an empathetic or justified character, whereas Master Sol is now being shot as a manipulative antagonist by the end of this episode. Let me be clear, no matter how much sense Qimir might be making on a surface level, these are very shallow promises, and everything that he says in this episode and last episode related to the dark side is not to be taken seriously by the audience. When he says lines like, killing someone in the heat of battle is justified, but killing them a few moments later is revenge. Again, the dark side is a very shallow way of thinking. Sure, you're killing someone in both scenarios, but the reason and why you're killing them and the emotions that you're feeling when you're killing them are completely different. Killing someone in defense of others, in defense of yourself, is much different than killing someone in rage and passion, which is what we see at the end of Return of the Jedi. When Luke has that opportunity to kill Darth Vader, he would have been changed. Even if he killed Vader and Palpatine, he would have been a different person. He would have succumbed to the dark side. So that's the first issue with Qimir's philosophy. Last week he said he accepts his dark side, but in reality he embraces his dark side. Accepting your dark side is a Jedi principle. Accepting your darkness, your selfishness, is part of the path of the Jedi. Controlling these feelings, understanding them, and letting them pass. What Qimir is doing is he's embracing the dark side. True Sith embrace their dark side. Darth Maul embraces it in his quest for revenge. Palpatine embraces it in his quest for power. All of these are fueled by anger, hatred, and fear, which Qimir in this episode says is semantics, that there's a different aspect to the Force that if you tap into these feelings, that's okay. And the way that the Jedi teach it is not the only way. So we will see how this plays out and if the show ends up trying to justify the dark side of the Force. But right now, I'm just going to hold out hope that this is just the seduction of Osha, that he's just leaning into all of her desires and leaning into those feelings that the dark side feeds on to hopefully bring her in as an apprentice. But by the end of the show, they cannot make Qimir this trailblazer who figured out that you can use the dark side and the light side at the same time, and that's true balance. That is not what they should do, because that goes against George Lucas' principles, and that goes against what he was trying to teach in the story of Star Wars. And if they do go through with it, I think that would be the biggest slight that this show has done to Star Wars and Star Wars canon to date. One positive that I want to branch off from this comment about Qimir is that there is a really interesting use of imagery in this episode, with Qimir living on this island and going for swims and taking off all his clothes, which I'm sure some people were like, oh, another thirst trap. But I think it's more symbolic to the fact that he is so free. The Sith are so free. They aren't chained down by the politics and the bureaucracy and the rules of the Jedi Order. And on the other side, it's juxtaposed by Sol physically restraining May at the end of this episode, and they're also in this very tight spaceship the entire time. Whereas Qimir is like, embrace all of your feelings. Look at how free I am. And again, the dark side is the easy path. They are easy feelings to succumb to. Fear, anger, rage, all of that is very easy, and it is freeing to a degree because you don't have to go through Jedi trials and be disciplined and practice patience and forgiveness. I think we all understand that these are very real world applicable qualities. Forgiveness is hard. Patience is hard. And some might see it as a burden, and they just embrace their hatred or their lust or anything like that because those are the lizard brain easy things to grip onto as a human. And that's why Star Wars is such a poignant story, because these things are very applicable in real life. So if they try and go back against these real world teachings, I think that's a big issue. We can't say that anger, fear, and hatred are good feelings to embrace. They are feelings that we feel, but as we've seen with Yoda and Qui-Gon, they're feelings that should be conquered and understood, and in time allow them to pass by without causing any harm to the people around you because of your selfishness. That was my, inside baseball Star Wars talk in this episode. And that was really what I clung on to in this episode, because that's really important that they stick the landing on that in the end. And I know they've said, oh, we want to paint the Jedi in a bad light or in a less favorable way. But still, the principles of the Jedi are the absolute good. Of course, the Jedi Order can be corrupted and changed. And we see in the prequels and the Clone Wars that it does happen, that they became complacent, that they followed the incorrect path. They became warriors and generals and led armies when they really were supposed to be following the Force and helping people. I mean, Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace, yeah, he frees Anakin, but he doesn't free Shmi, and he definitely could have. She was a slave. He could have freed a slave, but he didn't. And that was maybe in pursuit of the Chosen One prophecy, and that's just one example. I mean, there's so many examples in the Clone Wars and the prequels of the Jedi simply overlooking the common people and having more of their focus on the war effort and less on the living force and what the cosmic force is telling them to do to bring balance. They did not contribute to balance. They brought imbalance to the force as well. But again, Palpatine was the root cause of it. It wasn't the Jedi being evil. It was the Jedi losing their way, which is very different. And I'm not saying Sol is going to be evil by the end of this, but the way they changed the framing of him at the end of this episode makes me feel like they're going to make him the antagonist by the end. And Jedi can fall, but I'm not confident that they're going to make this as compelling as the fall of the Jedi that we see in the prequels and the Clone Wars. That's the main thing I wanted to talk about with this episode. As I discussed in the beginning, there were so many conveniences with Master Sol's connection being bad to the Jedi Order. He describes the massacre in the most vague way possible instead of coming out and saying, hey, someone with a red lightsaber just killed 7 Jedi. He's like, oh, everyone's dead. My whole team's dead. Just conveniently leaving parts out because it helps you extend the plot and it's vague. So it's like, oh, the mystery continues. And as I said, I really think they're just trying to set it up that they didn't get enough information so that when they show up there, oh, look at all these dead people by lightsaber cuts. Oh, Master Sol's not here. I think he might have done it. So I think by the end of the series, they're going to frame Master Sol and the Jedi Council will never hear about what actually happened. Master Sol will die and the truth will die with him. Who knows what will happen with May and Osha, but just the heavy-handed writing of Vernestra and that Padawan just getting on the planet, seeing all this, and within the first second, they're like, Master Sol probably did this. Vernestra's like, that's quite an accusation. So again, it's just heavy-handed writing and just showing their hand way too soon. Speaking of that, there's been a lot of theory crafting. I'll give a shout out to Troy who gave me this theory, but he said that Vernestra might be Qimir's old master. We know she's over 100 years old, and Qimir says he's been alive for many, many, many years. And we see him lift up his shirt, and it has sort of like a lightsaber whip type burn on his back. And Vernestra uses the lightsaber whip in this episode, so very much giving you that wink, nudge, nod that maybe she and him are connected, and that's why she's so cold or so secretive towards the council throughout this series. And that would maybe explain why she's different than what she is in the books, potentially. It also opens up the question, how is Qimir so old if he looks so young? Again, if they go down the rabbit hole of, oh, well, he achieved balance by using the dark and light side, and he can keep himself alive. He actually figured out what Plagueis could never figure out and could stop himself from dying. That would be a bombshell that I think would be pretty insane. We don't know if his lineage, Qimir's lineage, goes to Tenebris and then Plagueis and then Sidious. He might be an offshoot, and those other ones are their own lineage. But regardless, there are questions that I have about Qimir, which I guess is interesting moving forward. I will give a shout out that they did input some High Republic book canon into this with Vernestra when they say, oh, we're going to go into hyperspace. I know you don't like hyperspace. And she's like, it's not that I don't like it. It's just like unsettling. And that's referring to her visions that she gets when she goes into hyperspace. When she goes into hyperspace, she communes with different people. And we don't know if they're like apparitions or if they're the Force trying to communicate with her. It's an interesting piece of the novels. I haven't read all of her books, but that was in the most recent one, Defy the Storm. And I thought it was an interesting idea, and I don't think they're gonna bring it in that much into the show, but maybe. But yeah, other than Vernestra and Qimir, the rest of the episode is just this terrible plot on the ship with Sol, May, and Basil, where Basil's running around instead of just going directly up to Sol and saying, hey, that's a bad guy, that's bad guy. He's just like running around the ship for no reason. The ship turns on and off for no reason, even though they're not being attacked. They landed on the planet just fine, but the ship just somehow has power failures and such. It worked in the original trilogy because the Millennium Falcon was confirmed to be a piece of junk right from the opening. So when it had power failures, we were like, oh, yeah, it's a piece of junk. This is a brand new Jedi ship. Works fine everywhere else, but right when the plot doesn't need it to work, it doesn't work. May, this super secret assassin, gets outwitted by Basil and Pip, who like sprays her with motor oil, and then Pip steps on her boot. But she just killed 2 Jedi Masters, but she can't deal with these people. It's like in Book of Boba Fett when they have this super cool character like Boba Fett chasing around a little like kitchen droid and he looks stupid. It's just like, why is Disney Star Wars making villains or iconic characters look dumb? This is so bad. Oh, another piece of heavy-handed dialogue I just remembered from last week's episode. It was really jarring when Osha was like, I love you, Pip, even though previous to that episode, we had really only seen like 2 scenes with Pip. And now she's like, I love you, Pip, I love you. And Master Soul brings it up again this week when May's holding Pip. He's like, you love that droid. And he starts kind of going on this tangent about attachments and all this stuff. And, oh, Jedi are bad because they can't have attachments and all that. And again, it just feels like they forced that piece of dialogue in to say, oh, I love you, Pip, with not really building up that relationship. And it sounds stupid, but droid relationships are very important in Star Wars, and they're done very well. BD-1 and Cal Kestis in the Jedi Survivor games, obviously R2 and C-3PO throughout all the movies. I feel terrible, but I forget the Andor robot's name, but he's great. Right away, you understand he's a part of the family, but Pip, they just, again, none of the characters get any time to be characterized, so they kind of just skim right past that, and that heavy-handed dialogue just comes back this week, just so they could talk about, ooh, Jedi don't love, that's bad. Jedi can love, they just can't be attached, because attachment is selfish. You're possessing that person. That's why it's bad. Not that Jedi can't love. And that would have been an interesting thing to explore. You know, Jedi attachments, how far should they go? That's something they could have explored, but no, Jedi are just bad. They've always been bad. But yeah, I think that's all I have, kind of all over the place, but hopefully it was cohesive and made some sense. We got 2 more episodes left. I assume this flashback has to come next week with whatever happened 16 years ago. I'm sure Qimir was there, since we know he's really, really old. So he might have been there. He might have been the third party that meddled with everything. And that's why the witches and Jedi came to each other's throats and the Jedi killed all the witches, or something along those lines. I don't know. We'll see. 2 more weeks. I feel like this week, not much happened as usual with the Acolyte. Oh, and Osha put on a helmet because he told her to. So that was something. Yeah. So let me know what you guys thought of this episode. You can follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. Would love to hear your thoughts on the Acolyte. If you're enjoying it, that's great. If you're not enjoying it, I also want to hear your criticisms of it. And please leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. That really helps me out. I really appreciate it. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.